Some fathers say, "I love you," through words. Others say it through silence, through steady hands, quiet actions, and things that never change. On the edge of a rocky coastline in Maine stood a weather-beaten lighthouse, its white paint peeling from decades of salt and wind. Inside lived Thomas, the last of the old lighthouse keepers. He was a man of few words, few visitors, and even fewer smiles. But every night, without fail, he climbed the narrow iron stairs to light the beacon, a light that had guided ships safely for generations. Locals said the job was outdated, that machines could do it better now. But Thomas refused to leave. He had a reason. Long ago, he was a husband and a father. His wife, Mary, died young, and their only son, Luke, left home at 17 after a terrible fight, slamming the door behind him, never looking back. No calls, no letters, nothing. But still, Thomas kept the light on. He never talked about Luke. Not to the store owner who brought him groceries. Not to the fisherman who stopped by with fresh catch. But every evening, as the fog rolled in and the sea whispered its secrets, Thomas lit the beacon. Not just for boats. For someone else. For a boy who might one day come back home. People called it foolish, a father waiting for a son who may never return. But Thomas knew something they didn't. Love, real love, doesn't vanish with time. It just waits. Quietly. Patiently. Like a light in the dark. And one stormy night, after nearly 2 decades, that light would guide more than a ship to shore. It would bring a lost heart home. The days passed slowly in the lighthouse. Thomas followed the same rhythm year after year. Wake before dawn, check the lamp oil, clean the lenses, listen to the weather reports crackling over an old radio, and at dusk, always at dusk, climb the spiral staircase to light the beacon. He didn't keep photos around. Not even one of Mary or Luke. But tucked away in a small drawer was an old watch with a cracked leather strap. It had belonged to Luke. Thomas wound it once every week, though it hadn't worked in years. Just the motion of turning the knob brought him back to a time when he still knew the sound of his son's laugh. The townspeople admired Thomas, even if they didn't quite understand him. Kids waved from the beach, calling him Captain Beacon. He'd offer a tired smile, but his eyes always drifted toward the sea, toward the horizon, toward maybe. On stormy nights, he stayed up by the window, watching waves crash against the rocks like fists of the past. He'd grip the rail tightly, as if holding on to something slipping away. No one ever came up the cliff road. No letters arrived. But Thomas never gave up the habit. Never gave up the light. Because in his heart, he believed something few others would dare. That one day, far off in some uncertain future, a boat would appear through the fog. And inside it, the boy who once slammed the door would finally come home. It was in late December when the sky began to change. Thick clouds gathered like bruises across the horizon, and the air turned heavy with salt and electricity. The fishermen pulled in early, and radio chatter crackled with warnings of a strong nor'easter rolling in, one of the worst in years. Thomas didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, checking the old systems twice, reinforcing the shutters, and filling the fuel tank for the generator. At his age, storms were harder on the body, but not the mind. The sea might rage, but the light must not fail. That night, the wind howled like a wounded beast, and sheets of rain beat against the lighthouse glass. But Thomas was where he always was, at the top, seated near the beacon, eyes scanning the coastline. Just past midnight, a faint distress signal broke through the static. He leaned closer to the radio, heart thudding. Small vessel, engine failure. No visibility, approximate location, off Black Rock Cove. Thomas froze. That was just below the cliffs, dangerously close to the rocks. His hands, despite their years, moved quickly. He adjusted the beam, rotated it manually to cut through the fog in the direction of the signal. Minutes passed like hours. Then, a glimmer. Through the thick mist, the outline of a boat began to appear. Tossed by waves, barely under control, but moving toward the safe waters near the dock. The beam caught its hull, guiding it gently through the treacherous inlet. Thomas gripped the rail tightly as the boat finally made it past the rocks and into the calmer harbor. Relief washed over him like the tide. But just as he turned to sit, A thought pulled at his chest. Something about that boat. The shape. The name painted on the side. He squinted. The Mary Ellen. His heart skipped. That was his wife's name. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. Thomas didn't wait for morning. He threw on his long coat, pulled his knit cap low against the freezing rain, and made his way down the cliff path, every step slow but determined. The storm had eased slightly, but the air still bit at his face, and waves continued to slam the shore behind him like echoes of the past. At the dock, the crew of the small vessel was tying ropes and checking damage. A younger man waved toward him. But Thomas's eyes weren't searching the crowd. They were locked on one figure standing quietly at the edge of the pier, looking straight at the lighthouse. Tall, broad-shouldered, face aged by wind and time, and yet unmistakably familiar. The man turned. Their eyes met. Luke. Thomas froze, soaked to the bone, breath caught in his throat. For a long moment, neither moved. Time folded in on itself. The angry words, the slammed door, the years of silence, they all pressed into the space between them like fog. And then, slowly, Luke stepped forward. No grand gestures. No rehearsed apologies. Just a quiet, shaking voice. "You kept the light on." Thomas nodded, his lips trembling. "Every night." Luke's eyes welled up. He looked down, then back at his father. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome." Thomas took a breath, heavy and broken. "You're home," he said. They stood there for a moment, father and son, two lives worn by time and regret, before Luke reached out. A hesitant hand. And Thomas, without hesitation, pulled him into an embrace he had waited 20 years to give. In the distance, the lighthouse kept shining. A light never meant just for ships, but for hearts lost at sea.